Welcome to Within WordPress, and this is your podcast for today because, this is the podcast that touches everything WordPress within and outside of WordPress. And today with me is Wes, who hasn't been on the podcast before. So for the people listening and who don't know who Wes is, hi Wes, could you please introduce yourself?
Hey Remkus, pleasure to be here. My name's Wes Tatters. I'm the Managing Director and Infrastructure Architect for Rapid Cloud. Rapid Cloud is a new entrant into the WordPress hosting space, but it has an old legacy. Rapid Cloud grew out of BuddyBoss. BuddyBoss is one of the most complicated, most complex theme/plugin tools in the WordPress ecosystem. It basically allows a website to effectively be turned into Facebook, full social media platform, and a full app-based platform with headless WordPress running in Android and Apple Play stores. The nature of that sort of type of application,
quite complex,
adds some amazingly complex challenges. In the WordPress space. WordPress is fantastic, and I would say WordPress is fantastic at static websites. It's fantastic at building blogs. It starts to struggle a little bit once you start getting into e-commerce. While you've got a small shop with a small number of products, it does okay. As you scale up with thousands of product or thousands of visitors, WordPress starts to struggle. Similar in the e-learning space, LearnDash, Tutor LMS, Lifter LMS, all those spaces, great products, but as the sites that are hosting them become successful, they start to encounter serious challenges in the WordPress space. So much so that BuddyBoss team worked with the hosting community for about 5 years, trying to find a suitable hosting infrastructure that could deliver the high performance and equal to that, the high scalability that these particular sorts of websites demand. After a lot of tests, a lot of trials, a lot of complications, it became apparent that to do it properly takes a different mindset. To do dynamic scaling, to do dynamic hosting, to do high performance hosting takes a mindset which is very different to the traditional WordPress shared hosting space. And that's kind of where I came into the piece. I was effectively a BuddyBoss customer. I had BuddyBoss sites running in communities that were struggling. So I reached out to the community and started to look at the problems they were encountering, and decided to bring my skill set to the WordPress space. I have 40 years experience, which just scares me some days when I say it, in hosting, data center, and server infrastructure. I started in IBM Computer Systems and Wang Microsystems systems and Unix systems and ZX systems and all of these sorts of names that we all hear, but no one's ever really touched. I was one of those people back actually coding them in the early days with punch cards and then rolls of magnetic tape.
Yeah, I was going to say, you if you're in this for 40 years, you must have touched punch cards. I've had
ironically only in my education when I was studying. We were on the edge. We had sort of PDP IBM systems that had at least a teletype. My first assignment was on punch cards. But most of my assignments after that were at least on some sort of a keyboard. I was very lucky early on to be involved with Control Data, one of the companies which kind of no longer exists. Got has been absorbed as computer companies do. But they were one of the first. They were one of the first corporate focused computer platform systems. Control data systems were pretty much at the bleeding edge around the early 80s in terms of they sat on a desktop, they had a computer screen, they had a keyboard, and were actually could be used functionally. And similarly for Wang Microsystems, where we had similar sorts of technology. I worked on a lot of those systems in the early days, learned a lot about.
That kind of puts you in the dinosaur category, doesn't it?
Very much so. Very much so.
I have a few, I'm 51 and I have a few older friends who are early 60s, and they've actually developed with punch cards. There's a few that worked with the systems where an hour of computing time was allotted for a week of programming. So you would program the entire week, and at the given hour, you would upload it to a server. That server would run your code, and then the output of that was then returned to you. And they tell me of how that worked. You made one mistake in that entire week, and the whole week
rejected.
Was just done.
Rejected.
There was no soft fails.
There weren't options for mistakes back then. I was kind of at the edge of that. I'm not quite in my 60s yet, but I'm getting close to it. I started very young. I'll say that. But it taught me a lot early on about the mindset of computing and the mindsets of technology. But as I grew in that ecosystem, I have two passions in life. One is technology and the other is media. I'm also a film and television producer, and I produce television series, 3D animated series. I'm a broadcast journalist. I've produced TV shows. I've shot news stories. I've done all that sort of stuff. So I have this kind of bipolar world.
I read through your bio and I was like, that's an interesting one, because generally, in one way or another, somebody just kind of happens upon building a site, or they intentionally choose it. Your bio read as somebody who's went in an entirely different direction and then went like, oh, but you know what? This is also fun.
Look, as I said a bit, I wound up in the media industry at a point where IT and media collided. Primarily in 3D animation. I was the producer and series producer for the first 3D animated children's television series created in the Southern Hemisphere. We produced 26 half hours of animated 3D children's television for Australian television networks and for PBS in the US and BBC. But it was the same thing. It was still technology, and we were building massive server centers. I was a part of, in my spare time while I wasn't being a producer, I was holding together a 150 node render farm on Windows technology that was would shake when the data centers would run.
Not only were you doing these interesting things in media, you were in deep.
Yeah, we were deep in it. So
most people don't even know what a render farm is.
No, I built one. In fact, I built one of the first ones. But all those things set me in good stead for the next part of my journey. While I was doing all this, the internet was just on the edge. It didn't actually exist yet as the World Wide Web. So this is the mid-1980s. I was working with CompuServe, if anyone knows what that is. It was a dial-up modem that went bzz, 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 and you got some very slow chat forums in the public space. One of those chat forums was a publishing forum. And I got started chatting with a few people in the forum and discovered that very few people in the technology industry had a clue how to write.
Had a what?
Or really had a clue how to write. And what they discovered was that I had a broadcast background and a writing background and a journalism background, and reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested in teaching the world how to connect CompuServe to the internet? And I went, sure. So I wrote the the book for CompuServe, in conjunction with SAMS.net, which is a Macmillan Schuster & Schuster imprint, which was navigating the internet with CompuServe. It literally told people for the first time that this thing that they had called CompuServe could be connected to the internet and this thing called the World Wide Web.
That's funny. Because if that means you would buy a computer magazine somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, and it would have a CompuServe disk added to within the plastic. I'm wondering now if at any of those instances I have potentially come across you.
A lot of people have.
That's funny.
When I finished the book for CompuServe, America Online, AOL, approached Macmillan and said, hey, this book that you've just written about getting CompuServe connected to the internet, we're about to do the same thing. Could you also write a book for us?
That's funny.
Now, let me put this in perspective. I'm based in Australia. America Online never actually existed in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Was never really a thing. But we went, sure, let's write Navigating the Internet for America Online. The second book I wrote. Again, teaching people how to connect to this thing called the internet. All the while maintaining communities. Communities are something that has been very passionate for me my entire internet life, be it bulletin board servers to CompuServe chat rooms, eventually American Online chat rooms. Community has always been very important. And this kept on going. We kind of wrote a very small chapter in the AOL book about websites. Back then, the World Wide Web really didn't exist yet. Tim Berners-Lee was still basically in a basement in CERN, sort of trying to work out what it really looked like while this is all happening. So there was only one web browser, and then Mark Andreessen and his friends went, we've got an idea. We're going to create a new web browser that was going to be called Netscape.
Yep.
And they approached me, and I wrote all the books for Netscape on how to build web servers with Netscape.
Oh, that's wild.
HTML1, make HTML2, HTML3, HTML4. We got right up to 4.5, during which time I think Netscape was acquired by AOL and America Online. Microsoft Explorer had arrived. And at about that time, we sort of then merged all the projects together and it became Navigating the Internet. How to build websites with HTML, primarily with Laura LeMay, which was one of my co-writers.
I know for a fact now that I've read one of your books, because one of the Netscape books I have read on HTML. I know that for a fact. That's literally the book that I read that ultimately prompted me in building my first actual HTML. I'm not going to call it a website because that'd be pushing the limit.
I've been told that my book reached about 1.5 million people. And that's in actual sales and distributions. Where it went after that is hard to tell. I know it was rewritten and published in 15 different languages. It's very strange when a book arrives on your door in Korean. Yeah, and you go, I can see the pictures are all the same, but nothing else means anything. So it's been an interesting journey, that early part of my life. But the last part of that was interesting.
I was going to say, I think at the end of the whole introduction so far is just one of the wildest in terms of like impactful ways, monumentally impacted on the rise of the internet. I don't think there are many who can, at least on the hi, I'm Wes, and then
well, there's one more little bit that sort of there's one more little bit that kind of put the pieces all together.
Yeah.
During the launch of, I think it was Netscape 3, I had a phone call from the devs at Netscape. I was basically writing the books as they were releasing each version, and the devs would talk to me every day and say, hey, we're going to add this. And they went, we got this idea to stick some sort of a script thing in Netscape. And the conversation went, okay, you mean like CGI? And they're going, oh, no. We're thinking of putting Java in the Netscape browser. What do you think of the name JavaScript?
Yeah.
To which I went, yeah. They had a few other names, the MCA script. And so I was there when JavaScript became a thing. And you'll find the last book that I had the energy to write was the JavaScript Developer's Guide version 1.0.
That's funny. That's funny.
And it was written literally in conjunction with the guys at Netscape going, okay, we're going to put this in. And they'd write a bit of code, send me a new beta, and then we would try and work out how to explain how to use that bit in a book. So it was an early, interesting start to my career.
What year is this again?
Look, I want to say it was around 95, a little bit before then. Windows 95 was sort of kind of where Internet Explorer arrived and the world changed for the worse or the better. We'll leave that for a separate conversation. But it would have been around that point of time in the journey. Not long before that, I had a couple of chance meetings with a few people and I started moving into the server space. World Wide Web conference, which was kind of what WordCamps are today, but for the World Wide Web back then. It wasn't that big. You could fit the whole World Wide Web conference in an auditorium.
I would imagine so.
And it was actually staged in Australia. World Wide Web 8 was actually staged in Australia in my hometown. And needless to say, there were a few people there who I managed to spend a lot of time with and developed a lot of understanding of where the internet was going, including Tim Berners-Lee, who was actually the keynote that year. I got to spend an hour with him going, what do you think of this internet thing and this World Wide Web thing? And he's saying, it's ruining us. I hate it. I want it to be something entirely different. It's not what I envisaged. And even to this day, Tim still doesn't like the World Wide Web for what it is. It was supposed to be. He's a scientist. He's a professor. He's a person who's really deeply entrenched in metadata and data consistency and all the things that our World Wide Web today isn't.
If you look at the internet from that perspective, with that lens, there's quite a few things where you go like, that's not how I intended it. You said something funny.
It was a lot of that.
You said something funny. You said something of this is where it went wrong, and we're not going to touch on it, but I kind of do because that's mid-90s.
1995, Windows 95.
Yeah, exactly. And
Microsoft released it, MSN, pushed the internet into people's faces.
Yeah. But this is a thought I had yesterday, as in, where did the world make a turn? I arrived at the same 2-3 years. Yeah, but from a very different perspective, because I was thinking the time that cars went from glass headlights to plastic headlights is pretty much where I think went south. And I arrived at, this is around 94, 95, 96 is when cars start making this switch. And as you were explaining this, I was going, oh, that's interesting. There's from two very different perspectives, arriving at this basically the same conclusion, which is a very interesting one. Just needed to throw it out there because I literally had that conversation in my head yesterday.
It was a very pinnacle change.
It was.
Now, a lot of the industry at the time thought it was the Antichrist coming to take over the pure and amazing internet that was created by DARPA and universities and colleges for the sharing and well-meaning distribution of knowledge and education. Microsoft had some different ideas.
Yeah, they did. Quite.
And change the internet to much more like what it is today. And then we saw the rise of Google.
Yeah. If you look back now,
the other side of that,
you've done, I would say, foundational stuff in terms of whatever the internet became. And obviously, there's different versions of the internet, right? So, I think we can also say that not only did Microsoft change it, but it also started splintering into different versions of the internet.
Very much so, yeah.
What would you say? Because that was, we're going to call it 95 for the sake of the comparison, because from 95 to 2025, where we are now, not only your particular role has changed and enriched and all that. What would you say has been the red thread for you to stay interested in the internet for the last 30 years?
Look, I think to a certain extent is the fact that it keeps evolving. It's the fact that it does keep changing. It's the fact that it does keep my interest, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's sort of there are very few industries or careers, I would say, that you can walk into every day and go, what just happened?
Yeah.
And that can happen on an almost daily basis. But even up to today where, what just happened? Something changes, something new releases, something evolves. We've seen it in the last week, with DeepSeek, being launched by the Chinese and the value of shares in NVIDIA plummeting and, all the open AI people panicking because something they thought was theirs, someone else has now released something that's cheaper, faster, more efficient to train, and less resource intensive. So the internet and technology in general has kept evolving. I was talking to someone recently about my Netscape journey writing books, and they went, how did you do it? And I said, we wrote one every 3 months.
Yeah.
Netscape, we literally released 5 or 6 versions in under 2 years.
Yeah.
And every one of those was these major clinical changes.
If you look at the impact of the first releases versus the last release, basically, every single one had a huge impact because you had so many more features and possibilities and options and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
And JavaScript appearing in the later ones, just these things, and every time they change, it was a complete mindset change.
Yeah.
Anyone working in the internet world today appreciates that JavaScript is really now the glue that holds most websites together. Be it people that are just using a bit of jQuery to people using whole platforms like React and TypeScript.
It's still just
none of those. It's JavaScript.
Yeah.
It's the impact and changes that decision by a couple of developers at Netscape has just been astounding. So from my perspective, it's those changes that keep me interested and kept me attracted to the industry.
I think if I bring this back to how I am still hooked, I think it's roughly the same. I started programming when I was really young, 10, 11, then lost interest for quite a bit. Just had no purpose of application, right? There's nothing I wanted to write specifically. Also I was very young, so playing football outside was also very interesting. But it wasn't until the internet came and I started being online that programming and playing with code basically became interesting again. And it's never changed. It's the sentiment of, hey, there's something new, that's never changed. Because like you said, whatever you know now, 6 months from now is just not up to date anymore. Now you can either be deterred by that or you can actually embrace it and enjoy it, which I think you have, and I know for myself, I have as well. But
it's very much is that.
Yeah, but that's wild to think of something that holds your interest for 30 years, 40 years. Like, yeah. So let's look at the last part where you said, you started with this. So the BuddyBoss. BuddyBoss as an extension. Would you call it an extension or a version of BuddyPress, or how do you see that?
BuddyBoss was a fork, of BuddyPress. So BuddyPress,
but you have the theme, you have the core code, and you have there's a whole bunch of components there. So
BuddyPress was created maybe.
Sorry,
yeah.
I was going to say I've been using BuddyPress for since the beta. And I've built a bunch of sites with it, like 30, 40, quite a few. And then, BuddyBoss at the time was still a theme, I think.
Yeah. So BuddyBoss was an agency. And it was an agency that was building BuddyPress sites. And every time they build a BuddyPress site, sometimes hard to say, always felt like they were starting from the ground up. Building a BuddyPress site wasn't what I would say something for the a new person to the WordPress world, or a new person to online construction. A lot of the people that were coming into the space were coming from places like Facebook, which was, I've got a Facebook group. Ta-da! Hitting the WordPress space, then attempting to understand WordPress, then understand BuddyPress, then understand a theme and how it all plugged in together, was quite a daunting task for someone who really just wanted a one-click button that said, I just want Facebook on my website, on my WordPress site. So Tom and Mike, who were the co-owners of BuddyBoss, decided to build a theme and platform integration that basically made BuddyPress a one-click installation. Removed all those complexities, and BuddyBoss grew from there. As it grew, it got a lot of interest from people that were going, this is all great, but what we really need is these communities to be as good as Facebook. And that means we need it in the App Store. We need it available on an Android phone. We need it available on a Apple device or an iPad or a tablet. And we need it to be identical to our WordPress site. So the team started exploring headless WordPress before it was really a thing, looking at how to build WordPress sites and have them intimately linked to a fully native app in the App Store. That went through many cycles to get it right, and they eventually released the BuddyBoss app now about 4.5 years ago.
Yeah.
Which was a game changer. No one had released a native tool that someone could deploy it themselves in their own app store, under their own app IDs, and have it natively linked to, with React-based tool sets, native linked to their product. And not just to the BuddyBoss product, also natively linked to LearnDash, full LearnDash implementation at app level, natively linked more recently to Tutor LMS, natively linked more recently to MemberPress, all in React. So
it's a pretty
game changer
solution
in terms of technology.
I think there was one other company, AppPresser, who did similar things.
AppPresser is a different sort of product, but it wasn't, and it's still there, although it's kind of not on the radar as much as it was.
Yeah.
AppPresser wasn't releasing native components.
Correct. But you could turn your site into an app But
it was really just a browser wrapper inside. These were true React Native components. So much so that the LearnDash component could actually take an entire LearnDash course offline. So someone could sign up on their WordPress site, buy their LearnDash course, take it offline, please. Do the entire course offline, including pre-streamed and downloaded HP5 video and all of that. Complete the course, come back online, and submit their results.
That's a really sweet integration.
Yeah. So you couldn't achieve that without true platform integration.
So you were a user. You mentioned you were doing a lot with communities and stuff. Did you run communities on your own or for other people?
Yeah. Both. I started in the Microsoft world, and in the Microsoft space as an ASP developer. This is prior to WordPress. Focused on .NET Nuke, which was Microsoft's version of WordPress. It was open source CMS. It originally was called iBuySpy Portal when it was released by Microsoft at the day they released ASP.NET.
Yeah, I remember that one. I've had that installed.
Yeah. That was the proof of concept project for ASP when Microsoft released their ASP platform. And their foray into servers and online, programming, and what became now, their dominant C# language. Previously was Visual Basic, but C# became their premier language. I was very deeply involved in that community space. I was actually one of the MVPs for the .NET community for many years, and very heavily involved in the community itself as an organizer and a contributor and a source contributor and a forum. I was very active in managing their forums and communities. So I stayed in that. I was still in that space at the point where we originally moved into WordPress. Largely because, not unlike what's happening a little bit now with Matt, there was somewhat of a schism in the .NET Nuke space. .NET Nuke, the original product, was de-open sourced and turned into by Scott, lovely guy, and spent a lot of time with him, but he decided that he was going to make money out of it and basically did it automatic, created DNN software, which became the owner of the product. DNN as an open source community product still exists, but they went very all in on agency and government and data centers and government infrastructure, which kind of soiled and soured the community. Look, the community still exists, and I know a number of them still, but it's not the hundreds of thousands of people interacting in a platform anymore. It's sort of like the diehards still hammering away, going,
those who
this is a
refuse
great product.
to change.
So we were actually looking for communities for some of our customers, and we were exploring WordPress, and at that stage exploring BuddyBoss, and that was sort of around the time where I'd built a few WordPress sites before for customers, so I knew what WordPress was, but hadn't really spent a lot of time in the space at that level, and then started to look into it and went, wow, interesting products, but has anyone actually worked out what happens when you get more than 10 users on a site?
Yep.
And the reality is nobody had.
So that is basically the birth of Rapid Cloud.
Yeah, the edge of the birth. Yes, I spent, before we started Rapid Cloud, I actually spent about 2 years working with BuddyBoss customers and LearnDash customers and Tutor LMS customers. This was my own agency business. Basically, they'd come to me and go, my BuddyBoss site or my LearnDash site or my Tutor LMS site is great until great until 10 people log in, and then, by the time I get to 100 people are canceling their subscriptions and all those horrible sorts of things. So we looked at the platform, looked at the infrastructure, and started to develop a technology understanding around what dynamic sites need, which is substantially different to a traditional WordPress site. The things that a shared host doesn't offer.
Yeah.
The things that even most VPSs don't truly offer. There's some VBS products that are adjacent to things that we do. But we think about things a lot differently. One of the things that I realized very, very early on is that almost all community type products, learning products, tutorial products, WooCommerce products, are run on sites that are incredibly shaped. And what we mean by that is they might have no one on their site for 5 days, and then they might have 1,000 people.
Oh, yeah.
And then they might have no one on their site, and then they might have 1,000 people. Others have people between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. Crazy busy sites, then crickets for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Others have one really big event once a week with 20,000 people all trying to log on.
Yeah.
And then nothing. They're all incredibly different and incredibly shaped. And that's what the WordPress, and not just WordPress, but the hosting community in general, in what I call the managed space, really doesn't cope well with. You get into a scenario where we just keep upgrading you. We just keep upgrading you. We just keep upgrading you. And you wind up buying the largest plan, box, VPS, take your pick, that you need for that maximum point in time at the end of the day, week, month, or period.
So what you set out,
a big challenge.
I was going to say the thing you set out to fix is exactly that challenge, right? So there's as soon as you have a higher concurrency, whether people actually are logged in versus just visiting, and for those of you listening who don't know what the difference is, if you're not logged in, the entire experience can be cached and optimized and all that. As soon as somebody logs in, you obviously don't want to see somebody else's course. You obviously don't want to see somebody else's cart. So the entire experience is uncached, which requires a very different setup from what your server can do.
But more complicated and but worse than that is that to achieve that with most hosting infrastructure, you just have to keep buying bigger and bigger boxes.
Yeah,
or bigger and bigger data center.
Yeah.
To cope with that might be once a week, might be once a month. So the net cost is much higher.
Yeah.
People are spending a lot of money on infrastructure that if you look at the course of the entire week or the entire month, they may only be using 10 or 20% of in true resource time.
Yeah.
And for BuddyBoss customers, that was part of our agenda. How do we address those sort of things? The other side of it is that data centers and hosting in general is an expensive business to get into.
Yeah.
It's a lucrative business once you're in it, but it's only lucrative if you don't have to upgrade your hardware. If you have to keep upgrading your hardware or improving your platforms or improving your input performance, then that obviously eats quite aggressively into your profit centers.
Yep.
So we wind up with two problems in the WordPress space. One is called race to the bottom, which is all your shared hosts, being forced to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And the only way they can do that is just by continuing to run the same box that they bought 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And just using every trick they can in the book to try and serve those sites up. The biggest trick, obviously, caching. Stick it at the edge, stick it at the server level, stick it in a plugin, we just cache everything, and they won't really notice that their site, if they logged in, is slow, or they just accept that. Oh yeah, look, it takes me 15 seconds go to WP admin. I've had people that thought that's what WordPress is. 30 seconds to go into the plugins page. Oh yeah, it's got to load a lot of stuff, so I understand that.
Yeah.
That's how WordPress is.
Yeah.
So
it's not, but yeah.
We've got 850 million, pick a number, WordPress sites, out there in the ecosystem. Probably 99% of them are running on those sort of data centers.
Yeah. I think
they're
that's
running on data centers with 10-year, 15-year-old technology, first generation CPU cores from Intel, that they've amortized out of existence the entire data center probably, 5 years ago. And the only thing they're really costing them now is the air conditioning and the power to keep the thing running.
Yeah.
And some guy, they stick solar panels on the roof and some guy to run around with a soldering iron occasionally to, break another box, replace it. But in the space where we're in,
there's quite a few hosting companies.
Yeah.
That aren't not innovating, just keeping the status quo as low maintenance as
the race to the bottom has forced that on them.
I think we've departed from that ever so slightly, though. I think there's been some changes in that in the last couple of years, but
I think there has. But the GoDaddies, good platform for people to get started on. You can pick up a WordPress site for $5, and share your blog with your family or small business. But where it hasn't really advanced still is in the managed high-end space. It's still an area where the costs ramp up exponentially, and often with actually no true output in terms of performance benefit. I intimately know pretty much every hosting company. I work in the Make community, and I interact with a lot of the other hosts. On a at least a WordCamp basis, but we all know each other, and so we're well competitors, obviously, but we understand each other's needs and challenges. And we know that most of them are still on probably second or third generation server core technology, because the move to fourth and fifth generation server technology is a $20,000 per box cost.
Yeah.
192 core AM, 192 core AMD, Zen 5 CPU core, with 2 CPUs on the motherboard, and these things are real expensive boxes at that stage. So the race to the bottom makes it very hard for people to go, sure, we'll invest and we'll put our prices up. Because people push back, we don't want to pay anything more. So we had to find a balance. And that's what, that was part of the other challenges. How do you find a balance between what we do at Rapid is we're running the latest server technology always. Currently we're on Zen 4, about to move to Zen 5 processors in all our data centers, because regardless of how the way Rapid looks at things is, regardless of what plan you're on, you actually get the same performance. It's actually the same speed data center. It's the same speed server. It's the same internet connections. What our plans actually only really changes the amount of concurrency. We don't know how many visitors you can get at any point. So we had to think differently in this space, where if you look at a lot of other plans, you'll find that, you're down on that $5 plan. You're probably might be on a Xenon 1 processor in a rack somewhere with a cPanel control panel with a 500 other sites all squeezed into it. And you might step up. We've got some really good hosts in the VPS space who are still on old technology. Spent a lot of time with the Cloudways team. Worked really closely with them. But their fastest processor currently on their Amazon space is the Amazon C5 Xenon cores, which are a Series 2 Xenon core, which is now 5 years old.
Yep.
Or more. So even at the VPS level, and there's reasons for that. There's just cost pressures and those sort of things that make people go, oh, I want an 8-core CPU with 16 gigabytes of RAM, and someone will go, here it is. It might be a Xenon. Yeah,
I was going to say that whole discussion of how many CPUs do I have, how many cores, how many this, how many that. It is for all intents and purposes, that is an antiquated way to measure the performance of your server, of your machine. Yeah. Most people don't realize this, but what you're explaining here is there's different generations.
Yeah, but the only thing that the number of cores really changes is the amount of users you can handle simultaneously.
Yeah, but then it still matters on which generation you are.
Yeah, but it doesn't change the underlying speed. So if you're on a first generation core, and your page physically can't load, process through. I mean, I've seen BuddyBoss WordPress sites with 150 to 200 plugins installed.
Yep.
And you sort of go, do really? Oh yes, every one of them. Everyone's. We were talking to a guy recently. I was talking to a guy who goes, they need 512 megabytes of PHP worker RAM to log into WP Admin.
Oh, wow.
If you don't have that, you can't get into WP Admin because there's just so many plugins and so much code and so much going on. Every time you hit WP Admin, it just sucks all this memory out of the system. And we just go, oh, well, sure, we'll work with you. But that's the nature of the big end of town, which Rapid was built to try and help service. It's the people that aren't quite. We're not. Look, I could actually host NASA, but that's not our core customer base. It's the people that have become successful who is our core customer base. We've got BuddyBoss customers on 6-figure revenue per month, 7-figure revenues per year, running online courses and communities, and then branching those communities out into public forums. I've got a site that's in beta at the moment that's doing thousands of dollars in memberships while it's in beta. So these are sites that have gone from a side gig or a side hustle to many
full on. This is my work. This is my job.
In many cases, this is now my job.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that get into trouble. Or they just keep throwing money at it.
Yeah.
And hoping that those solutions will fix it. We had to design we came and designed a different philosophy.
I like the change of philosophy, breaking away from the mold. One of the things every now and then I post about performance and performance related stuff, either on X or wherever. One of the things I say that always gets a lot of questions is like, if you solve your performance by throwing caching at it, you haven't solved performance. Caching doesn't solve performance in no way, shape, or form.
Certain types of
not actual. Sure, but not the actual raw performance. So whenever there's no caching available in whatever scenario you're working in, you are then rendered. What is my actual computing power that I have to my availability?
The only exception I would say to that are two sorts of cache. First one is OP cache, which half the WordPress world truly doesn't understand, and a lot of hosts don't. And the second one is object caching, both of which have a relationship to performance.
Sure.
OP cache in particular.
There's some internal optimization, I would call them.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but
yes, dynamic sites can't be cached.
Throw more people at it, and it's still going to be an issue if your hardware can't cope with it. So,
100%.
Yeah.
One of the other challenges that the WordPress space faces is complexity. In the real world, when we build an application, we employ data optimization coders. We employ people with data or enterprise, structural experience, and they lovingly craft data structures and they build optimized platforms for databasing. WordPress is the antithesis of that. WordPress has this monolithic ecostructure built around WP Meta, WP Post Meta, and WP User Meta, which is a wonderful little tool designed to make it easy for someone to just add an extra field and all those sorts of things.
Yep.
But
it comes with a
architecturally, again, it's great for 5 users. Architecturally horrible when you hit 5, 10, 15, 20,000 users. One of the reasons, the biggest source of problems with that is actually the post meta table. The post meta table is pretty much used by everyone for every custom post type in the WordPress space.
Yep.
Users to build these complex ecosystems of structures and custom post types and taxonomies and categorization structures, all built around these meta tables. The problem is that the way they do it is by putting data into the value column of the WordPress meta table. Now, so it was designed.
Yep.
Except that the value table isn't indexed in any way, shape, or form. Now, what that means is that good old MariaDB and MySQL can't optimize or accelerate any query that does something really simple like, I've just created a meta field which is called business type. And in that business type field, I put small business, large business, agricultural business, whatever. And then in my checkout, I want to be able to go look up that meta type, find all the queries in that meta type, then output tasks or users or people that match that search. Well, it's fantastically for 10 users. Doesn't work as well when someone goes, I need to be able to all a couple of those together. So like this product or this category or this category or this category and this category and this category and this category. 100,000 users. Well, it's even worse than that. They're indexed joins.
Yep.
And the net result is we've seen sites doing table walks of potentially millions. They're going to walk the entire meta table trying to match 2 records. It would be 500,000 records that it walks every single page request to try and pull out simple information. So architectural WordPress, as you scale, works horribly against you. We see the same things in the user meta tables. Recently, where they came to us and said, it's really good, except our checkout keeps crashing. Oh, okay. We'll have a look at that for you. We found that they had a plugin someone had lovingly written for them that did this thing where it looked at all the products that a person had purchased and compared that with all the products that other people had purchased, and then attempted to match all those products together and give them some recommendations on other things they might like.
Yep.
Because it was all agreed in these taxonomies and meta tables, it was taking 40 to 50 seconds, and these massive SQL queries taking 45 seconds that were just crashing the server.
Yeah. That's a very common problem inside WordPress when you scale. Yep. So options table and the meta table are, for me, are default tables that if they don't have an index yet, when I start optimizing, that's the very first thing I do.
Yeah.
And a vast majority of really weird database related query issues just just vanish like snow in front of the sun. Gone.
They just go away. 32 character subindex on the meta value column, and huge numbers of the problem disappear. But there are WordPress sites out there that are just living with that day to day, because they just assume that's how WordPress is. I'm thinking of going to Spotify or Shopify because my WordPress site's too.
Yeah. And then they read somewhere you need to clean up your tags and clean up your options. Sure, you do, but really the gain is in optimizing the data. Yeah. No, it's interesting. I like the whole approach of how you actually wanted to solve the problem you were seeing. I think that's
the journey all along. I've always been looking to solve problems that I'm seeing. And solving problems for communities of people.
Yeah, there's plenty of people who want to solve problems. I don't think that's the issue. I think what the problem is for the vast majority is they don't necessarily want to solve the problem at the root. They want to just look at the thing that they see and then just kind of fix the thing that they see. But as with, if for your personal health, if you have an issue somewhere in your body, you can say, okay, fine. I have some skin rash. Let me put some ointment on that, and that'll
kind of rub a bit of cream on that.
Exactly. But have you solved the actual issue of why you have that problem? Right. And that's a long journey, and that's, you need to figure it out. Am I allergic to, I discovered when I was 11 or 12, I discovered that I was allergic to chrome, nickel, and cobalt, as in metals inside. So I was wearing a cheap watch, and I get like red blisters. I had no idea.
Yeah, rashes.
And I got rashes and blisters and everything. And like it's the same thing, right? You can just solve that by taking off the watch. But why do I have it? What is the issue underneath? And what I like you hearing explain in many different ways is that you actually dive deep into the great. Here's the problem, but I actually want to solve the root of this problem. So I need to be searching for the problem behind the problem, and then come up with that solution.
And that's a little bit of the philosophy that we built at Rapid. As a company,
I'm a big fan of
that. When we designed the concept of the company as an architectural concept, its performance was peak. Building a support hosting infrastructure that, probably unlike most hosts, a lot of our support team were actually developers. We migrated a number of our support team from BuddyBoss. Plugin developers with plugin experience, which means that we actually empower our support teams to say, go and find out what's the real problem.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Work with the customer. Don't just go, as I've heard so many times in the past, this was as a customer, and you got too many Ajax calls. That was the biggest complaint that I used to get from my hosting companies with BuddyBoss. So, too many Ajax calls on your site. You're going to have to. We're going to have to turn. We suggest you turn Ajax off, and you sit there and you go, "Let me tell you how headless WordPress works."
Yeah,
it's like
we kind of need it.
No, it's kind of the underlying magic source of the whole platform. We can't just turn off Ajax, for the want of a better word. And part of that also comes down to, being intelligent about things like other center options. Sort of probably 90% of the WordPress world is still on Apache. It really shouldn't be in most cases. Apache is great for statics. It's great for certain sorts of hosts. It's really not that great for WordPress sites with PHP sitting underneath it, because at the end of the day, PHP is this pretty much legacy monolith that doesn't play well with strangers unless you've only got one person on your site at a time. The moment you get concurrency, the moment you get loads, you get all these resources happening, which is what platforms like Nginx and more recently Lightspeed Enterprise are becoming much more attractive in that WordPress space because they handle concurrency so much better.
Yeah. And Nginx as a base web server for anything that scales is where things need to be. I agree.
Yeah. The challenge with Nginx, is it, for most part, still needs a data engineer somewhere attached to the platform for configuration. It's more complicated.
Yeah. For sure.
Which is a detriment for most people. I had a conversation with CEO of one of our partners recently, and we were discussing the perfect WordPress site. The perfect WordPress site or hosting site is a dashboard designed for soccer mums that only has enough buttons to get their site running and keep it running. And that's not a negative. It's just a reality. They don't want all that technology. They don't want to think about all those questions about data centers and configurations and all of that. I still want to run BuddyBoss, LearnDash and everything else and run a online community for their, 1,000 closest friends. So what they want is simple, one click, but they still want all that underlying technology. So they sort of kind of want iceberg mentality. They just want to deal with that little bit of, they want to only have to worry about the little bit that's above the water. Everything that's underneath it, can someone else just make sure that?
Yep, very true. I think there's the whole principle of developing software that is simple, or that at least appears to be simple. It can be very complex what it does beneath, but it should be simple. It should look simple. It should work simple. And a lot of the thinking, it needs to be indeed, removed, obfuscated, or at the very least, turn it into a simple mode and a developer mode, right? So if you need it, sure, it's there. You can access it this way. But if you don't need it, just please present it simple. I do like where Project Gutenberg with the new dashboard interface as it's being developed in Project Gutenberg, accessible by installing the Gutenberg plugin. I do like the direction we're moving into, because I feel like this message is something we're seeing right now. And it's been a while since we had that.
We're version 200 of Gutenberg, I think, last release. If I remember rightly, I was at the
20.1
party
and 20.2 have just recently been released.
So 200 releases. It's still not quite there, and it still has as many detractors. It has people who love it, but it's a good journey. That doesn't mean there isn't space for Elementor, or isn't space
for sure.
Isn't space for new products like Etch and things like that are coming downstream in the in the next 12 to 18 months. But it's a framework that at least stepped the regular person out of the old version 1, editor. Of that, write a bit of HTML in a text box and hope like heck that it works. If you wanted to build a theme, of your own, employ a team of developers, or just rely on, insert name of theme seller here. I think Gutenberg gives a level of accessibility out of the box. It's not quite there yet. The page flow builder is still not quite.
No, it still needs a lot of refinement, but it's at least something that's high on the list of priorities that they're working on. So I think in general, I'm still quite excited about what WordPress currently is, and especially what it is in the middle of becoming. I think we've had a rough quarter, sure, but I'm still bullish on where we're going and what we're doing. And I think in that context, I think what you're building with Rapid Cloud, I think that's another example of there's still a lot of room for innovation. There's still a huge market for different and better interpretations of things that are quite, normal or default. Like everybody understands hosting. Everybody understands they need it. But the way you can produce your hosting stack and have it do X, Y, Z versus how somebody else does, there's a huge room for innovation there possible. So yeah, I want to thank
certainly
you for
believe. Yes.
Hmm?
We certainly believe so. Yes.
Yeah, and it shows in both how you explain the things you do, that and the whole philosophy behind it is quite different, and I like it. I like the let's solve problems at the root. Again, that's one of my main drivers of how I look at things, and it's always nice to see that being reflected. I want to thank you for this conversation, Wes. I think it's been a lot of fun. Certainly, also on the memory lane trip we took, because
it's been a pleasure.
Having been on the internet in the early 90s myself as well, and then as you go through, there's a lot of stuff that's changed and improved. Some of them maybe less more than others, but it's fun to hear your version of it, certainly as someone who's been very close at the heart of the expansion of the internet, I would say. And again, thank you so much for this conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Happy to chat anytime. And for anyone that may or may not be around, say hi at WordCamps as well.
Cloudfest and WordCamps, I heard.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. Thank you so much.